Hello, my name is Mary Mack. I'm the Executive Director of ACED, the Association of Certified E-Discovery Specialists, and I want to give you a warm welcome to our ACED webinar channel. And our fabulous affiliate, RICO, our Diamond affiliate, is making available to us a fabulous forensic expert who is going to talk about to catch a thief, using forensics to track the money. So this is going to be quite the in-depth on forensics and chasing some of those leads around. So with us, we have David Greetham. He is the Vice President of E-Discovery Sales and Operations at RICO USA. He has his Master's of Science in Forensic Computing from Cranfield University, based at the Defense Academy of the United Kingdom. He's also the developer of the patented and award-winning REMLOC. He is a licensed private investigator in Texas and Florida, certified fraud examiner, certified forensic litigation consultant, a testifying expert, and a member of the ACED Global Advisory Board. I understand there's been some other awards that haven't been yet released. And so, David, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the platform. Everybody who's online, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A panel, and you'll get a link to the webinar at the end, so you don't have to take those kind of notes. But definitely ask David your questions. And, David, take it away.
Well, thank you, Mary. What a very kind introduction, and I appreciate that. We're going to talk today, we end up with a case study, but we're really going to talk about some techniques that were used to really get to the case study. So that's going to come right at the end. And really to understand the case study and what things were done, we're going to talk about some of the techniques used in advance, if that's okay. So you can see on the screen, we talk about the importance of choosing your forensic image, deleted files. I think most people know about that now. We're going to touch on that. Recovery of internet history, deleted email, USB analysis, and some other things, some other investigative considerations might technically, might not necessarily be a technical consideration. And then we're going to end with a case study, and I would like to answer any questions during this that anybody has while we're talking about a particular topic. So as Mary said, please feel free to put your questions in the box there. So with that said, it all starts with the forensic image. There has been a lot of ambiguity about what is an image, what is a forensic image, and so we split it out into two ways, a logical forensic image and a full forensic image. So a logical forensic image is really, think of a forensic image in itself, regardless of what type. What makes it forensic is it's repeatable, it's a validated process, it's well documented, and it can be used as evidence. And it stands the test of what a court might ask during questioning about it. There are some set procedures in place and some kind of policies in place that allow that, but they must always be validated and admissible. So a logical forensic image is really looking at files. It's looking at maybe a network folder. It's maybe actually an entire C drive of a laptop, but just the active data. And our live data. It could be half of a file. It could be 10 lines of code from a program. It's really focused on the data and the process of collecting that, validating that, and downstream work. This does support file level and operating system forensics only. So if you want to do an investigation and deleted files are in play, this is not going to help you. Very often, we find that you really don't know at the start of a matter what's going to be in play. You want as much intelligence as you can. And so from an e-discovery perspective, logical forensic images are typically the normal because people have identified areas of a network or somebody's My Documents folder or whatever that is, or email container or something like that. But you can do analysis on files. Files have a lot of metadata. They track a lot of information. And the operating systems as well. If we take Windows by example, Windows leaves a lot of caveats behind. just to make it more efficient. It's not that Microsoft want to help all the forensic people. Well, we do appreciate it, but I don't think that's the purpose. It's to make the operating systems more efficient. And we'll get into a little bit of that. Conversely, a full forensic image doesn't look at the data. It is a physical device. So, more commonly it's a laptop or a desktop, and it's really a replication of the physical media. Again, validated and admissible, but it does support full forensics analysis. So not only that file level and operating system forensics that the logical forensic image supports, but beyond that. And as we go through and talk about some of these techniques, we'll talk about whether a logical image would have allowed this or it wouldn't. So I just wanted to clear that up, right? Full forensic image is the media. A logical forensic image is typically the data. So that's important to know. Recovery of delete files, I think a lot of people know about this. But a Microsoft operating system, by example, uses NTFS and uses a master file table, or the MFT, to track where all the files are. It really works as a Rolodex. So if you think of an example, I'm going to show my age a little bit now, but back in the day when I used to go to a library, you'd actually go in and speak to the librarian and say, I'm actually looking for a particular book. And the librarian would, flick through some kind of indexing system, say, oh yeah, here it is. It's not checked out. It's in section 3. It's on the third bookshelf, and it's on that shelf. It's the second book from the right. And you would go there, and it was there, really kind of a primitive system, but it functionally worked. And of course, libraries have modernized since then. But I tell you that because the master file table works in a very similar way. By example, if you create a Word document and you type some content and you go File, Save As, it's a new document, you give it a name, the master file table is going to provide a physical address on the media to say this is where that file is saved. It's going to keep a record of the actual address. And when you go back to that file and you go File, Open Recent, or you browse to the file, then you click on the file that you created, what happens at very high speed, you can't tell, is it goes to the master file table, says, hey, Word says, hey, where is this file? And the master file table says, it's over here, here's the address. Word points to that, and it opens the file. It's like a magic trick. It works very, very efficiently. Well, what happens when you delete a file is it doesn't get deleted. I think most people know that. It actually just makes an adjustment to the master file table. And it removes the entry for that file. It removes the address, and it removes knowledge of that file, and makes that space that the file was occupying now available for new data. So people ask, okay, well, how long are deleted files recoverable? It all makes sense, right? Well, how long they're recoverable? The truth is they're recoverable until the data is overwritten with new data, and that could happen because the master file table, which allocates addresses for data, now thinks that this is available, unused space, and it can store a file there. However, in this day and age, when you're buying a laptop or desktop, the hard drives are so big that Windows will use, generally speaking, it will use the rest of the available space first before it comes back. Now, processes like a defrag or some housekeeping on the system will certainly have some impact on that, but really recoverable files are recoverable until they're overwritten. There's no time period on that. It really works on how much use the computer has had, how many new files, and what have you. Even turning a system on and turning it off will create new files temporarily, overwrite some recoverable deleted files, and shutting it down will do the same. So there's not a magic answer to how long are they recoverable. It really depends on the use of the computer. Typically, computers don't even live more than 3 years these days. We move forward in technology so quickly that in 3 years' time, it's like, oh, my laptop's a piece of junk, right? How many people have said that? Well, it's only 3 years old, but it's because the more we do, we slow down some of the operating systems, and it doesn't perform the way it used to do. The longest I've ever seen, I've been involved in recovering deleted files, is 7 years old. And very old computer, obviously wasn't used a lot, and surprised that computers even exist after 7 years. That's the oldest, so there's no time limit. It's really driven by the size of the hard drive and the level of activity of the user that's using the hard drive. So let's talk about recovery of Internet history for a moment here. For those of you who are too young to remember, I'm very jealous, by the way. The Internet came around late 80s, early 90s, and it was kind of useful, but really not as we know it today. It was just too slow. We had modems, and we'd dial up, and they'd make all these noises. It sounded like we were communicating with aliens, and eventually you'd get connected. And quite literally, I would start my connection to the Internet and go make coffee and come back, and hopefully I was connected. And you would go to a web page using a browser, and it would just take an age to download. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of graphics because, graphics, bigger files take a lot longer. It was mainly text-driven. And people really weren't adopting to the Internet, and, nice to have, but, not fast enough to not cause immense frustration. So Microsoft kind of took this as a business challenge and said, okay, how can we make the Internet faster? And they brought out Windows 95 in 1995, surprisingly, and they said we bring out a new browser, and the Internet's going to be much faster. Coincided with a lot of people moving from a modem to ISDN, which was the next thing after modem before we end up where we are now with 1 gigabit connections. And so Windows 95 came out, heralded with a lot of marketing, and it's like, yeah, I'm a bit dubious, but let's give it a try. And at first I thought, yeah, this really isn't much different. So a couple of days later I went back on, I was like, wow, this really is a lot faster. And what they actually did was, they didn't really make it any faster, but they stored data to give the impression of being faster. So what happened was when you first went to a website, it would still be as slow as it was before. But in the background, it would download the web page to a hidden system area, and it would store it on the basis that the next time you go to that web page, it will keep a track, and it will load the local version from the hard drive in the hidden system area, and it will check in the background for changes. And the changes on websites in those days was primarily just text, because this was a problem for everybody. So not really much in the way of graphics changes. So that had the impression of like, wow, Microsoft nailed it. The Internet's faster. The good side of that from a forensics perspective is that hidden system area was somewhere that a forensics expert could access, and they could find out what web pages had been visited, because there's somewhat copies of them in there, and there's a tracking system that says, hey, I know I have a local copy of this. I'm going to load that first and then just check in the background for changes. So that's fantastic. It also tracks file downloads. So if you've gone to a website and downloaded something, it's going to track that. Interestingly, it also tracks search terms. And the reason it tracks search terms is because when if you go to Google nowadays, and Google wasn't even around in those days, but there was Yahoo and AOL and other systems. When you go into a browser and you type in, best restaurant in Chicago and click Google search or whatever tool you're using, what actually happens is the URL changes. It changes very fast. You probably don't even see it. So the URL at the top will say something like www.google.com equals Q Chicago plus best plus restaurants. And that information is downloaded into that hidden system area. So that's how you can recover search terms. Interesting, this is all 1995, right? A lot of people on this call probably weren't even born then. But today, Microsoft still have this in their systems. They just never removed it. And I guess today we have very graphic-heavy websites. And so really the impact of this probably isn't significant for us these days. But they just never removed it. It still happens. In fact, if you take a 1 terabyte drive and you format it and install Windows, and Windows takes X amount of space, you have more space taken from your available storage because of these reserved system areas that Windows will use for automatically backing up some files for the backup and restore process, for shadow files, and for hidden system areas for things like this. And the theory of this is that internet history is recoverable pretty much forever, the entire life of a computer. Now, there is a FIFO system in there, which is first in, first out. So if somebody's a very, very, very heavy browser, they're online all day, every day, ultimately the reserved space will fill, and the oldest records will drop off to make space for new records. But in my experience, that might happen 1% of the time. It's got such a big space reserved for storing the internet history. And I'm telling you this because this all kind of comes together in a case study that we're going to cover in a few minutes. People ask about deleted emails. Excuse me. And you know, how do they work? If you think of email containers, such as PST or an NSF file or OST file, they work in a similar way to the master file table. The MFT works in the Windows operating system. They have their own little index. I remember one day I was foolish enough or brave enough to do a live demonstration on recovering deleted data from a PST file. And the saying, "Don't ever work with children, animals, or computer data live," is well thought out. So I was in this room of attorneys, and we were talking about, it's a few years ago, and we were talking about recovery of deleted emails. And I opened I showed the audience on the screen, here is my email container. It was just about 4 gigabytes. That shows you how long ago it was now, because I can't imagine having only a 4 gigabyte PST these days. And they could see the size. And I opened my Outlook I was using at the time, and I literally went through all of my folders and my inbox and my deleted items, and I emptied everything. I deleted my calendar entries, literally everything. And you could see there was nothing there, and there was nothing in the deleted items. There was absolutely nothing. And I closed Outlook down, kind of took a gulp, like, what have I done here? And took a gulp and went back to the area of the hard drive where the PST was stored, and it was exactly the same size. The size had not changed whatsoever. Because the data was all still there, what I really did was just remove it from my view. I then took the PST, I ran it through a tool and changed some things in hex to intentionally corrupt it, and then did a PST recovery process, and all of the data came back, and I exhaled and breathed a sigh of relief because I realized, hey, this could go anywhere. And all the email came back. It's like a magic trick. But email containers work in a very, very similar way, and that's why I share that. Web-based email, where people go online and read their email, a little more challenging. Internet history, of course, comes into play here because those pages are downloaded, so you can get some snapshots and you can get some aspects of the email that way occasionally. Of course, temporary files are created while this happens as well, so you could recover deleted files and look for maybe your yahoomail.com or whatever it is you're doing. And there are some options online. In fact, some of the service providers who provide email that can be accessed online actually now have some anti-purging things in place where you can actually recover some of the email that has previously been deleted, in air quotes. So deleted email is a little more complicated, although the containers are much easier. Web-based emails, there's some challenges and some other techniques in there. You're certainly not guaranteed to get everything back, but you're extremely likely to get a large section of that back. And finally, in this section, we always talk about USB analysis. And I think people are surprised when, obviously you find people the last day of the job, they plug in a thumb drive and they copy whatever they copy, and they go to their new employers and take this thinking it's theirs. And what people don't realize is when you install a USB drive in a Mac system and in a Windows-based system, it actually tracks the insertion of that USB in many, many places, much more than you'd imagine, because as you get into the Windows registry, It needs this information to be able to track if it's been inserted before, if it needs to load a driver, and things like this. And it's incredible some of the information that's actually recoverable from the Windows registry of the insertion of a USB device. By example, the electronic serial number. I mean, that can very specifically tie a device to this insertion. And not all USB devices have a unique electronic serial number. That varies by manufacturer. You may end up getting a generic one, so you'll realize that during analysis. It'll track the make and model. It'll track how many times it's been installed. It will also track information, what's been accessed or copied to or from the USB device. And I'm thinking thumb drives here, external hard drives, even cell phones. It'll include the dates and times as well, and how long it's installed for. So a lot of rich investigative information comes from the insertion of USB drives or connected devices. It doesn't have to be a drive. It could be a Fitbit. It could be anything. Then there's really things that I'm really not going to touch on an awful lot, but there's other areas, and all of these areas. If you just have a logical image of a C drive, if you like, and the Windows operating system is on there, you can recover all these things from that logical image. So there's lots of things. Recycle bin analysis, right? These are files that are discovered within the recycle bin with any information that could be passed from the informational files found. So such as the file names, when they were put into the recycle bin, when the recycle bin was emptied, dates and times in association to that. That might sound like a very rudimentary part of an investigation. Hey, what was in the recycle bin? Not what's in the recycle bin now, which of course can be important, but what was previously in the recycle bin that's not there anymore. Why is that important? Well, it shows intent. It shows that somebody actually put it into the recycle bin and then emptied those contents from the recycle bin in their mind to be unrecoverable. Jump lists show recent documents accessed and stored. Prefetch files show recently executed applications and the times at which they were launched. So if somebody's going to install a piece of software that will intentionally overwrite files or delete them and intentionally overwrite them to make them rendered unrecoverable, the actual evidence of that tool being run could be shown in your prefetch. Interesting as well, Windows keyword searches. If somebody goes into Windows and is looking for a file, that's obviously tracked and recoverable. And first of all, as an investigator, I didn't think that was such a big deal. But I've had a couple of cases where that has really been the smoking gun. Yes, you were looking for this file. So there are other forms of active data because of the operating system that you can actually perform some analysis on, and even some things that are not listed here, the recovery, the shadow copies that Windows will create to help efficiencies. And all of these caveats, all these investigation systems, and we're talking about Windows specifically here, are available because Windows is designed for efficiency for the user, for good housekeeping, for good performance. The good news from a forensics point of view is that there's a lot of rich information that can be gathered from this. So some other investigative considerations I just wanted to mention, again, not necessarily technical. Follow the money, right? There's always money involved. There's always money involved or personal gain. And I've spent a lot of time recovering deleted data and encrypting accounting backups and working on decrypting them and giving them to a forensic accountant. If there's money involved in your matter, that's really the first principle: is where did the money go? Where was it? Follow the path where you can. And of course, when it gets outside of U.S. jurisdiction, it gets a little bit more difficult. But the computer system that was used to move money, to some of the things we've already talked about, has some potentially very rich information, as we're going to find in our case study in just a moment. tracking from within a file. This is kind of interesting because there's a lot of metadata in files. There's been cases where kidnap victims have been recovered because somebody took a proof of life picture and sent it to the family to show that the kidnapped victim was still alive and holding a picture of today's newspaper. That had embedded in that the geolocation. 15 minutes later, the law enforcement kick the door down and rescue the kidnapped victim and catch the bad guys. I think people know that now because of location services, but that's been available long before you had a switch on your phone that said turn location services on or off. Other things inside a file, in the very early versions of Microsoft Word, they used to track the computer that the document was created on. And the way they tracked it was they recorded some information about the system, including the unique electronic serial number of the network card. And this is before we had wireless, really. And, very, very old versions of Word, and it records things differently now. I remember a case where somebody had actually sent somebody from a fake email account a Word document, and from analysis of within that document, the network card unique electronic serial number was found, and the investigating party went to the manufacturer and said, "Hey, you produced this network card. Who did you sell it to?" So, well, we sold it to a PC manufacturer. They went to the PC manufacturer, who happened to record every single component that they sold as part of a PC build process. And they had records that came under subpoena that showed who this computer had been sold to, or the network card that was in this computer. And they actually tracked the bad guys that way, and it was a very, very serious matter, which involved murder and lots of other bad things. So there is information, very rich information available within files in the metadata. Of course, each file type is different, and each version of a software package can be different. There's a lot of rich information available in JPEGs, if they're created a certain way, PDFs if they're created a certain way, and things that can really tie you back. And there's an element of investigative thought processes. How do you get back to the source if you don't know what the source is? Another one is surveillance, right? As much as Dick Tracy as it sounds, there's electronic surveillance taking place, there's physical surveillance taking place, and people are looking for hidden things, which kind of takes us into steganography. So steganography is really interesting. This is something I studied quite a lot in my younger days when I was trying to impress professors in formal education. And, it's translated as hidden writing. Stegan is Greek, I believe, for hidden, and graph is for hidden writing. And it's recorded going back to 440 BC, where a Greek historian wrote a story about somebody who had to take a message, and they were worried about getting caught in enemy lines. So they shaved the person's head, they wrote the message on the head, and had to wait for his hair to grow, and then this messenger went to deliver the message, and the message was, "Shave my head." And the head was shaved, and the message was there. This is recorded history. It goes back a very long time. There used to be things like you hide something in wax. So somebody say, "Hey, I have a gift for you. It's a candle or some other wax gift." And when you melted it, there was something else inside. It was really hiding things in plain sight, but in such a way that very, very difficult to see. From a physical point of view, there's been cases where somebody's wrote on an envelope and wrote a message and then put a postage stamp over it. There has been cases where somebody might have sewn a message into a garment or into a cloth purse or something like that, and made it into a piece of clothing, and nobody would think to look. And when you get to the other end, the message is, "Hey, here's my purse," or "Here's my carrier," and they would cut it open and read. I mean, rudimentary, but absolutely things in plain sight. From a digital perspective, if you look on Wikipedia, there's a really interesting file they show you when you look in the steganography of taking using a special tool and writing in this tool a word and creating that into an audio file. And it sounds, again, like the aliens are landed and what have you. But if you sent out an email to somebody and they knew that you use this tool and they use the same tool, they could actually decode it and see the word or the words on the screen. Pictures embedded in video and in other pictures are the most common. This was some of the strategies that some of the 9/11 terrorists used, very hard to detect, and essentially hidden data everywhere. And I tell you this because this is kind of part of our case study. Public knowledge, computer printers have been quietly embedding tracking codes into documents for decades. And as you can see on the screenshot, you probably can't see very much. But what is embedded, when color printers first came out, a lot of law enforcement were concerned and government were concerned about the quality of the printers was so good that people could photocopy money or documents originals and purported to be an original, things like this, because the quality became so good. So a machine identification code, which is basically a serial number of the machine, is embedded into some areas of print, so small you can't see it. If I go on to the next slide and I've zoomed in on that, hopefully you can all see those yellow dots. Those yellow dots are binary code and represent the serial number of the machine that this was created on. This is today, this is public knowledge. You can Google this and find out lots more information. And it's incredible that this goes on. So if somebody finds counterfeit money, if the government do an investigation, find counterfeit money, under special tools they can look at a $20 bill. I was going to say a $1 bill, but why would anybody counterfeit a $1 bill? And they can look under microscopic technology and find this, translate this from binary into make a model and serial number of the machine, and you can go back to the machine manufacturer in the same way previously you could do with network cards and really find who this machine was sold to. Really interesting way. I mean, you get into an investigation like that, it's really interesting. So that is how our case study started. There had been some software being advertised online and in publications at a ridiculously reduced price, which nobody could believe. And, there's a saying that if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And a test purchase was made. And a test purchase showed, most manufacturers engrave things into the actual media themselves, which has some logical process behind it. But the test purchase was made, and it showed that this was a counterfeit DVD. And on the receipt of the test purchase, they had a color logo. So we looked at the color logo and found the yellow dots, and a subpoena was served on the manufacturer of the printer, and they provided the information for the warranty and who it was sold to a third party. It was sold to a distribution channel, but they had registered for warranty. Surveillance followed, and actually it took to a house. I mean, you think of a big group of counterfeiting DVDs by the tens of thousands. You wouldn't think that wouldn't happen in a house. Ultimately, a civil search warrant was served, and quite a healthy-sized team, because if there's going to be a lot of equipment, there's a lot of people doing a physical search, and quite a big forensics team. I think there's 6 or 7 of us, because we were going to image all of these computers. There was going to be, who knows, 100, who knows what it was going to be. And we turned up, and it was a house, and it was we found out very quickly this wasn't the area where the counterfeiting was done. This was just the office, if you like, or the home office of somebody who was doing this and creating the invoices. In fact, the search revealed only one old computer in the house. So as a forensic team got together, they're like, guys, go home. This is a Saturday. I'll stay here and I'll image this, and it'll take me an hour, and 2 hours or whatever, and I'll go home. This is all there is. So didn't quite work out that way. While the search is still ongoing, I get this one old computer, and it's pretty old and looks like it hasn't been used in a while. But, I want to create a full forensic image of this just in case. So I finished the image, and I went to the kind of person who was leading this. I said, hey, I've done the image. I think I'm going to get out of here unless you find something else. He said, well, can you have a look at it? Do you have any forensic tools with you right now where you can give us some kind of basic? I said, well, you know what? I'm here, and I have nothing else to do. Sure. So I pulled out my own laptop out, and I connected the image, and I used some spatial analysis tools. And I started going through the processes of recovering deleted files and internet history and some of the things that are just standard. And the initial analysis showed that there'd been a USB device. There'd been quite a bit of USB device history. And I could pull from that something had been installed just 3 days earlier. I was like, okay, maybe this computer isn't as old as I thought, because it's being used because somebody plugged in a USB device recently. I got the model number from the logs, but I just didn't recognize it. As you do this a lot, Lexar has its own kind of unique ways of doing model numbers, and Seagate and other USB device manufacturers have some pretty recognizable codes, but I just didn't recognize these at all. So I pulled out my laptop, and I got online with a hotspot, and I started doing a little bit of research, and I went to my trusty research tool Google as one of the ways of researching it, and found out, I was like, oh yeah, this is a different kind of USB device I've not actually seen before. And I got a picture of it on the screen, and I showed this to the physical search team. I said, hey, when you're looking, see if you find this. And they found it. In fact, they'd already seen it in a kitchen drawer, just hadn't realized the significance. It was actually a USB watch. And it's like, okay, there's something definitely not right here. They've got a USB watch that's been attached to this device. It's found in a kitchen drawer. Let's start looking at the watch. Started creating a forensic image of the watch, and then continued my analysis. So I carved internet history. If we revealed a bank account in Latvia. For those of you not from Europe, Latvia is a known location for banking irregularities, money moving around, and some very loose regulation. It was at the time anyway. Found deleted copies of web pages, and the web pages included online banking. Recovered search terms used, right? Why not? We're recovering internet history of what was searched recently, and discovered several searches for properties in an island off of Spain, and then searches for realtors in the same area. Recovered deleted emails, and found documents for purchase of a property in Spain. Really kind of stories coming together here, right? There's a lot of illicit things going on. We then start looking at the watch. The image is made, and honestly, at this stage, a volume image would have been fine because there was really no deleted files to recover. There's just one file on there, and it was a Excel spreadsheet. Again, going back a couple of years, so the spreadsheets were not as robust from an encryption perspective as they are now. And I'm still sat here. This is the only computer I'm working on. The physical search is still going on. And I spoke to the lead investigator. I said, hey, we have some tools back in our lab. They're pretty good tools that will help break this encryption, I believe. It may take some time, but and it was like, hey, you're here now. Is there anything that you can do now to help us get into this spreadsheet? I was like, well, I can try because I'm here anyway, but I'm not super optimistic. So I started trying a few things. I had a couple of little local tools on my laptop that didn't work. And then I said, okay, I'm gonna do a brute force attack. A brute force attack is just keep trying different passwords. But there could be hundreds of millions. So I actually ran a process to create all the words that were found on the computer image and build them into a database. And I wrote a little app to run those words against the Excel spreadsheet as a brute force attack, thinking that people use common words. The words might be on their computer. Days previous to this, your banking password was pretty easy to find if you did online banking because it would store the word in plain text and so on. and ultimately ran this tool, and after about 25 minutes, it actually did crack the password. And opened the Excel spreadsheet, and there was this big gasp amongst the investigators as this spreadsheet was being opened. And the spreadsheet really was the smoking gun. It contained a list of secret assets, a $3 million home in Marbella, off of Spain. There's about a yacht that had been purchased that was there. They had their banking usernames and passwords, which was, very thoughtful of them to store that so that money could be recovered. What was most important to the customer was a list of customers and transactions, because from this, my customer, who were the software developers, wrote to everybody who purchased these DVDs that were counterfeit and said, you know that they were counterfeit by the price. Here is an invoice for the full value of this, and it's your choice. You can either pay this, or there was underlying threats of litigation without actually saying it. And that was the biggest victory for them, to be honest with you. Also, it was $11 million in several accounts, and one of them was in Latvia, which just confirmed what we'd found scraping internet history. So really, the forensic processes really did produce results. The full forensic image allowed recovery of deleted files. The evidence was preserved properly because this became evidence. Internet history records revealed lots of evidence that really helped us get to the truth. Deleted files were critically important because without those we wouldn't have known some of the information that we learned. Encrypted files recovered. I mean, honestly, there was some element of good fortune in that, but if that hadn't have happened on the Saturday, we would have gone back to the lab and we would have ran it through a process where I'm confident we would have broke that encryption and really had good results for the client. It just happened a little bit quicker because there was some good fortune involved. And ultimately, the client, by sending out letters to people who made the purchases, ultimately recovered over $17 million in license fees. And then criminal proceedings followed. All started really with getting a location, finding out where the place to be was, and some of it was through steganography. But the forensic image choices were very important. Of course, deleted files can be key and important to any investigation. The internet history, USB analysis, that type of standard process that most forensic people will do to start learning the facts, critically important. And we're very grateful to the operating system manufacturers for making their systems so efficient that they leave these caveats behind. Steganography is a very interesting topic. I'd encourage people to go look into it a little bit more, play around with some of the tools. Send secret messages. It's very, very interesting. Of course, the location is important. And at all times, you want to get to the root of a case, you need to follow the money. And we did follow the money through internet carving, through doing a test purchase, to tracking where the money went that way for as long as we could. And really, as you get into fraud and people doing things like counterfeit DVDs, the financial motivation is the number one motivation, and that can really lead you, cut out a lot of time and lead you straight into getting to the facts. So with that said, I hope you found that interesting. Happy to answer any questions that anybody might have or any comments.
Excellent. Thank you, David. This was very, very interesting, and of course we've got questions. So here's your first one. Hi, I'm involved in an investigation. At issue is file access and validating work done. Was the person performing work on files or accessing a remote work machine and working when she said she was, or was she falsely claiming she worked when she actually wasn't? What metadata in the files and machines, for example, her home laptop and the machine she remoted to, should I look at? Thank you.
Yes. No, it's a great question, and I don't know if I can give you a fulsome answer without knowing a bit more of the details. But I think the places I would immediately be looking to would be the log files on the remote machine. It's obviously going to access when people are logging in, and they're going to have some caveats within that machine. Some of the things we talked about today, what files were accessed on that machine, when they were accessed, what username was used to access them. And if whoever asked that question wants to reach out offline afterwards and really get a little bit, ask a couple of questions, I think I could guide you right down the right path for sure. But I'd probably need to know just a little bit more information.
Excellent. Excellent. So the other question that we have, David, is what is better, a logical image or a full forensic image? And when might you want one over the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's changed over time as well. With the use of encryption on computers now, sometimes a logical image is really all you can get that's meaningful. Now, most of the investigation techniques we used in this case was from the Windows operating system, which would be captured in a logical image. The big advantage of doing a full forensic image is not only can you do analysis to show that files were deleted, but you can actually, in most cases, recover most, if not all, of those files. And that goes beyond just a Word document that somebody might delete. It goes on beyond things that the operating system does, like it will create as a master file table is updated, it will create a backup, and eventually that backup will get deleted and replaced by a new backup. Things like that can be very, very important. That will come from the unallocated space or the unused disk space, if you like. If you remember on the master file table, when you delete a file, it just says that area is now available and considers that unused space or unallocated space. So it really does vary on the circumstances. One of the challenges is the industry we're involved in and the work that we do, you just don't know enough at the start. It used to be that people just collect live data because it was quicker. The problem with that, if you collected just a folder and you started reviewing the documents, like, oh, this is referring to a document somewhere else I don't have, you kind of have to go back to the well. As full forensic imaging from a time commitment has become more palatable, the technology's got faster, the validation processes are faster, your fail-safe is a full forensic image. But if you know enough about the circumstances ahead, if there's an e-discovery issue and there's no allegation of spoliation, perhaps a logical image or even just an image of an area of a hard drive, not the entire thing, might be more appropriate. I think it's based on the intelligence that you have at the time. I will say in favor of a full forensic image, though. It doesn't really cost any more. It will take a little bit longer, but like I said, the technology speeds it up, and you never have to go back to the well. You never have to go back to a custodian saying, hey, remember us? We were here 3 weeks ago. We didn't get everything. We have to come back, because you've learned things during your analysis that, oh my gosh, this is referring to an encrypted QuickBooks backup, and it's not here. I find an email that tells me something. I'm in favor of a full forensic image if you really don't know a lot of detail. And if you do, that really helps you make a decision. And that's kind of one of the first things we covered on this is really choose your forensic image. And if you really don't know, take a full forensic image. There's no additional cost. It takes a little bit longer. And you don't have to go back to the well. But in some cases now, you talk about mobile devices, by example, a full physical image really isn't as much use to you as perhaps a logical image. So it really varies on what you need to collect, what the circumstances are. The full forensic image for a computer, like a workstation or a laptop or a desktop, is your fail-safe. When you come into network drives, because network servers operate very differently and much more efficiently, they will use multiple drives, even just to store one file, for redundancy and hardware failure and backup and faster access purposes. So really a full physical image of a server, the recovery of deleted files is really not a realistic option unless the circumstances are perfect, which they never are. So a logical image of data on a server would make more sense.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And another question, is it common for an image to be corrupt during collection?
No, it's not. In fact, part of the imaging process is that you validate it, and I mentioned there's processes in place to validate that what you have is an exact replica of the source, and you haven't changed anything on the source, the metadata, etc. And so during that process, at the end of the imaging process, there's a validation process that goes on, and it's an electronic documentation is created saying, here's the hash value of all this data that I've collected, and here's the hash value of all the data that was the source, and the two will match, and that's part of my validation process. Now, is it technically possible that once you've done that and you've left, and you go back to your lab, and one of the first things you're going to do is make a backup of that image? Is it possible that there could be some physical corruption on the media that you've stored? Yes, it's possible, and some forensics investigators will not leave the premise until they have a backup of the image that they've created. So it's technically possible. It's unlikely, but it's going to be more physical corruption on the drive than the actual file system physical corruption on the image, certainly in my experience anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We've got another one. I worry that I'm not asking for the right information when conducting financial discovery because I don't know what keywords to use. In other words, I don't know what to ask for. Can you suggest any requests for electronically stored information or other types of information that help to follow the money that might not be obvious to lay people?
Right. So beyond the bank account words and fraud and some of those search techniques, absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. And if that person could connect me offline, there are a list of terms that we use as a baseline for financial fraud investigations beyond the obvious. I'd be happy to follow up with that.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know, David, you used the words from the Bear Stearns. Who was it that went down during the financial crisis? Lehman Brothers. I think there was some great search terms in that report.
Some of those, some of Enron, and some that we've just really gained through experience. And wow, you get to a notification like, wow, I wish we'd searched for this. This would have been so much easier. Let's keep a note of that for next time. And so some of it's that, and some of it is public domain information. You're absolutely right.
Well, fantastic. Okay, so any other questions from our listeners?
I'd encourage people, if there's no more questions, I'd really encourage people, if you have a little geeky tendency and you want to know a little bit more about Steganography, look at the Wikipedia page. They have a really nice audio file at the very bottom that you can listen to, which is very cool technology and really good to learn.
Fantastic, and everyone's going to be very grateful for the extra time you have just given them in their day for Greetham. Thank you for a wonderful, informative, educational webinar on forensics and what we can look for when we're following the money. And I thank all of you for listening, and thank you to Rico, our wonderful Diamond sponsor, for serving up Sir Greetham to school us and explain some of the forensics involved. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Mary. It's always my pleasure. I wish you have a good afternoon.